Quand je la prends dans mes bras, elle me parle tout bas, je vois la vie en rose. Elle me dit des mots d'amour, des mots de tous les jours, et ça me fait quelque chose. Il est entré dans mon cœur une part de bonheur dont je connais la cause.
God knows it's a love affair with Paul. So it was obvious. He was smaller than Julia, but he was looking at her with eyes magnifique. And she, Paul, she was always asking, it was like, how's a pigeon do? Oh, cool, Paul. And Paul was looking at Julia as she was good, and he was in admiration for his wife.
Des nuits d'amour à en mourir, un grand bonheur qui prend sa place, les ennuis, les chagrins s'effacent, heureux, heureux à en mourir.
Cooking, it's an expression of what you learn, what you see, what you smell, what you are able to do with your fingers. And when you cook, you give your love. It's more than to feed your body, it's have pleasure.
La bouche est quasiment le centre du monde. Tout est totalement sexuel dans la table. Et là, tout dans le langage du corps, on peut comprendre exactement comment ça va fonctionner après.
With Julia and Paul, clearly you read between the lines. I mean, he comes home, she makes him a great lunch, and they obviously go to bed every day.
Elle me l'a dit, l'a juré pour la vie. Dès que je l'aperçois, alors je sens en moi mon cœur.
Hi, my name is Lindsey Bahr. I'm a film writer with the Associated Press, and I am here with filmmakers Betsy West and Julie Cohen, who are behind the beautiful documentary Julia. We've just watched a really, really gorgeous and sort of romantic scene that we're referring to as the Pear Tart scene that we're going to be discussing here today. But, I guess first, I just really wanted to kick off with this sort of inspired choice to film your own food sequences for this film and not just to rely on like the archival footage of Julia preparing food from her show. Can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to do that?
The starting point, of course, for so much of our film was Julia Child's body of work, The French Chef, that aired on PBS and later shows. And as fantastic as Julia is in those moments, as lively and as great a teacher and everything that's wonderful about her, the food doesn't really look that fantastic because they're limited by 1960s technology, and not even the best 1960s technology, because as our film shows, they were a little cheap, frankly, at WGBH in those days. So we really wanted the love that Julia felt for food to come through and for the audience to see the beautiful scenes of food being prepared in all of its great glory. And we had the huge advantage of having the technology of modern day, top-notch 4K cinematography to bring the food to life in the film, and we went for it.
Luckily, we weren't actually operating the cameras. We had two, amazing cinematographers. Claudia Raschke, who we've filmed a lot of our films with, including Julia, who did all of many of the interviews and the verite. And then early on, we heard about a photographer in France who specializes in food cinematography, Nanda Bretellard. We thought that he would really add so much to this to be able to do the macro shooting and the slow-mo, and to make the food look as luscious as Julia felt that it was, to really bring the viewer in.
What was sort of the decision behind you obviously focusing on a few of her iconic dishes, the beef bourguignon and the roast chicken and obviously the pear tart? Like, how did you decide which ones to film, or are there a bunch on the cutting room floor?
We didn't film anything that we didn't end up using in the movie food-wise, and that is because we saved the food shooting to be the very last step of our process. We knew that we really wanted food that would help drive the narrative. It wouldn't just be like decoration. It would really be kind of part of the storyline. So as a result, we were like, let's cut the film together and then figure out which are the dishes that we want to connect to which scenes. And we had fantastic help in this process, which was the cook and food stylist Susan Spungen, who is not only expert at making food look beautiful, but also is an expert in Julia Child's body of food. Every piece of food you see prepared in the film is an actual authentic Julia Child recipe, except a little bit of a wok Chinese food scene at the beginning that just shows how Julia fell in love with Chinese food. Other than that, we went totally with her recipes, but we worked with Susan and our producer Holly to make decisions about what food should go with what scenes.
So let's talk about how the pear tart came with this sort of representation of their love story.
We were really drawn to the idea of a feminist love story. I don't think we knew at the beginning how sensual a love story it was going to become, but when we found the letters that Paul and Julia wrote talking to and about each other, and the amazing photographs that Paul took, we realized that we were going to lean into the sensuality of their relationship in their young marriage living in Paris. I mentioned before that we had 2 cinematographers. The idea was we were going to bring Nanda from Paris and have him film scenes that we were doing of cooking this food in a kitchen that Holly arranged to be created in a studio in Manhattan, a Julia replica kitchen, complete with all of the copper pans, the way Paul had arranged them for Julia in her kitchen, and the authentic Garland stove, which Holly found in a garage in New Jersey and then had renovated. So the 2 cinematographers were going to come, and Susan was going to do the cooking, and we were going to do the variety of shooting there, but COVID intervened. So it turned out that we couldn't get Nanda to come to the United States. So we wound up doing 2 different shoots. Claudia shot in the studio in New York, and Nanda was in Paris doing this special macro close-up shooting. The pear tart was something that Susan suggested. Julie and I said, look, we want a really sexy, probably a dessert. We thought that would be really good. And, when you think about sexy desserts, you often think of chocolate. We suggested that, and it was Susan who said, no, what about the pear tart? It just has so many wonderful steps to it. It takes a while to prepare, and it's so sensual doing the dough and the tart part and the incredible pears. And as she described it, we thought, okay, this will be great. And it turned out to be even better than we imagined, frankly.
So we were preparing 2 whole separate pear tarts, one in New York, one in France, shot completely different ways with our 2 very differently styling cinematographers. And then in the edit room, our genius editor, Carla Gutierrez, marries them all together. So it looks like you're just seeing one pear tart being put together, when in fact you're seeing on separate continents different pear tarts being performed. It's funny, you talked about this as our pear tart scene. Internally within the film, we call it the sexy pear tart scene. People have asked when they see the film, wow, it's incredible. Like, how did the cinematographers know to film it so sensually? But the answer is that we told them. We already knew what scene this was going with. So we were like, okay, here's the Pear Tart. Just make it look like, consider all the steps and just make it look as sexy as possible at every turn. And we think that you'll agree that they really got into that assignment and really nailed it.
Oh yeah, I mean, just rewatching it right before, and you're like, when the drippings are coming down off the pears, and it makes you want that tart.
Yeah, and the little whipped cream at the end.
One other thing about just the decision to make the Julia and Paul love story kind of an overtly sexual story. In movies, there's kind of like often a certain kind of sexuality that women are granted, and it's only certain women for that matter, and conventionally beautiful, perfect figure, often petite, and like most of all, like they kind of got to be young. There's this view that like, okay, over 35, nobody wants to hear about your sex life. And we thought that making showing Julia and Paul's marriage to be as sexual as it was, and putting that in a very mainstreamy movie context is actually like, we're feminist filmmakers, and we feel like that was a feminist statement on our part, and we wish that women got to have more sexuality after they turned 35. So at least for this film, we went for it.
Now, is this like food styling, like for an advertisement where it's not actually edible in the end, or are these actually, yeah, okay.
No, that was one way that our plan differed a lot from people, in commercials, which frankly kind of mid to cheap level food is often the stuff that looks the most beautiful in commercials. But as we learned through doing this process, which I actually hadn't known previously, what you're seeing there usually isn't food. It's like glue or whatever. So that we felt like it was important to really be cooking Julia's recipes and really seeing them. The disadvantage that put us at, and the reason that the commercial people don't do that, is that while a lot of elements of food look beautiful when you're first preparing them, it doesn't last. So our cinematographers had an extra challenge, because like there's that point where we're pouring the gravy over the roast beef. It looked beautiful for like the first 42 seconds, and then it congeals and looks really disgusting. So we had to have it prepared a couple times, and each time the cinematographers had to, like Claudia just had to jump right in, get it exactly right, get the lighting perfect, get her move perfect, because if you'd missed it the first time, then like a minute later, it looks disgusting.
That's incredible. So did you have to ever like go back and repeat because of that?
Yes, you sort of had budgeted in your time to like sometimes do a thing, a couple like the hollandaise sauce and the gravy, and a couple things had to be done a couple times, but everything is absolutely edible, and our crew took the food home at the end of the day and ate it, and it was delicious.
That's wonderful. Just like on Julia's show, as I learned from your film.
Just like the show.
And I will be referring to it as the sexy Pear Tart scene from now on.
Yes, please.
But obviously it's not just about the tart too. It is about Julia and Paul's relationship. So I was just wondering what your process was, how you uncovered these sort of incredible love letters, and how you decided to integrate them in that beautiful script into the scenes.
We knew that they had a strong marriage, but when we got into the archive and started looking at some of the letters that they wrote to each other, but really also the letters that they wrote about each other to their friends, in Paul's case, to his brother, describing each other. We love that. And we love the kind of evolution of the relationship. It was not love at first sight. And they were both a little wary of each other. Julia didn't love Paul's mustache, the way he looked, and Paul was not so thrilled with Julia's kind of vibrant laugh, which was a little bit too much for him at first. But when they, as we say in the film, when they went to China, when they were both assigned to China, their love blossomed, and we love the fact that it blossomed over food. I mean, Paul was someone who was very adventuresome, culinary adventuresome, and he didn't want to eat the mess hall food from, the US, the OSS or the US Army base. He wanted to go out and eat real Chinese food, and Julia loved that. So that was the beginning, really, of both their courtship and kind of setting Julia up for her grand revelation in France when she lands there and has her first lunch, that Paul takes her to the famous restaurant, the oldest restaurant in France. And she has the Sole Meunière and just, falls madly in love with that and with the idea of becoming an expert cook. We also had the photographs. Paul was a fantastic photographer, and there's just thousands of pictures of Paul's, but certainly from their time in France, of just loving portraits of Julia Child, languishing in the field and with her long legs splayed out in front of a pier, and on and on. So it gave us a real opportunity to use these various materials, excerpts from letters, diaries, the photographs, and other people's observations to describe this romance.
The observations that you just saw in the scene, particularly those that came from our fantastic French characters, Danielle Delpuche, who was the personal chef to Francois Mitterrand, and Francois Simon, a great French food critic who we show only revealing his facial identity so that he can still go into restaurants and do his critic thing without being known. Each of them brought so clearly to us when we interviewed them, they brought so clearly that sense that the French have of the larger significance of food. Like, food isn't just food, it's about so much more, although it was certainly our storytelling choice to emphasize the sensuality of the love of food. That came very organically in those interviews. You start talking to a French person about food, and within about 3 or 4 sentences, they're going to be talking about sex. And that certainly happened.
Because that is something that we don't see your process in interviewing these people, and you get such wonderful evocative quotes and stories. And, Danielle in particular, was it hard to coax those sort of anecdotes out of her? Like, or was she just ready to talk about their relationship?
There wasn't a lot of coaxing going on. She came from her farm in Périgord. She took a train up to Paris and then met us at the Cordon Bleu. So you see in the background, there's this beautiful kitchen, and she sat down and just unleashed, first of all, about the sexism that she and Julia faced in France and also in America. But then she had met Julia in the United States and knew Paul as well. And we just loved her description of their relationship. She clearly saw how much in love they were, just animating this relationship. There wasn't one person that we talked to, I think, who didn't remark on how devoted Julia and Paul were to each other.
Did you come out with sort of a renewed appreciation of her? Or did you, had you known this all going in, or?
We went in as fans, but far from Julia experts. So it was really amazing to learn really every element of her story. Was not only, there's revelatory stuff, but also just so much fun to learn. This is someone who it's really enjoyable to spend time with. That was probably amplified by the experience of so much of the edit process happening during the pandemic, a period where everyone's so closed in, and the idea of foreign travel, which is celebrated so much in the film, and gathering with others to eat feels like a dream that was sadly far away. But at the same time, the importance of home cooking, what Julia championed, it felt really special to be immersed in this material at this particular time.
Well, thank you so much, Betsy West and Julie Cohen, and congratulations again on your beautiful, beautiful documentary. If you haven't seen beyond the sexy Pear Tart scene, I would highly recommend going and checking out the whole thing, because it's delightful and you will want to hit the kitchen immediately afterwards.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Lindsay.